So thank you everyone for returning to the venue, and once again welcome back to our online attendees. Let me introduce the second panel of this Bulgaria-Korea Policy Forum. As I interluded earlier, we will tackle the benefits of EU-Korea and Bulgaria-Korea cooperation when it comes to regional stability, to peace and security, and we'll also comment on the opportunities for exchange when it comes to public policy innovation and good governance. In this panel, we have three ladies, so it's very much a female-dominated panel. But first, we will hear from Dr. Elena Atanassova-Cornelis, who is Senior Lecturer in International Relations of East Asia at the University of Antwerp, and also a professor at the Catholic University in Leuven. But she is also recently she co-founded the Southeast European Center for the Asia-Pacific Studies here in Sofia. And she was kind enough to also participate in the process of guiding our Next Generation Korea Fellows. We organized a workshop with her last month when she actually engaged them together with a small number of other young scholars and university students in a discussion on how Europe could play a more active role in the Asia-Pacific, and of course what this means for some of our strategic partners in that region, Korea included, why the strategy is also important for Bulgaria. And I also would like to personally thank her for in her head as a co-founder of SEECAPS, that earlier this week she moderated a very interesting discussion, which was once again discussing how this new EU strategy on the Asia-Pacific could yield benefits not only for Europe, but how we could also entice countries in our part of the world and in Central and East in East Europe, the newer member states, to get more involved and to see that there are benefits for them when it comes to engaging with the Asia-Pacific region. So this will be our first speaker. Then the second one, we are going to hear from our third and last Next Generation Korea Fellow for this year, Mrs. Margarita KICHUKOVA, who actually developed a unique paper. I believe it is a unique topic that has not been tackled before, neither in academia nor in policy terms. She basically examined and compared the historical reconciliation experience of South Korea and Japan, which is very much ongoing still, and try to find how we could transfer some of the knowledge, some of the lessons learned to the very, very topical issue of historical reconciliation between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. And she will focus on the people-to-people exchanges as a pathway on that front. Last but certainly not least, we will finish this panel and the forum with an intervention from Mrs. Milena Andreeva, who has been with us from the very start of the project last year. I still remember fondly when we were actually brainstorming about this project and dreaming about it together. In the summer of 2019, actually, she has mentored Margarita in the preparation of her paper, and she had also authored a policy brief that will look at strategic foresight and how the Korean experience could be helpful to the Bulgarian public administration in, let's say, stepping up its game when it comes to strategic planning and foresight as a new public policy innovation too, I would say. But now let me go back to our first panelist. Once again, I remind you that those of you who are joining us online could pose questions in the Q&A window that you have at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to address them at the end of the session. Of course, those in the venue are also welcome to do as well. Now, I give the floor to Mrs. Elena Atanassova-Cornelis for her intervention. Elena Hello and welcome to the session. You are joining us from Belgium. Please introduce us to this very interesting but still quite unknown issue here in Bulgaria on how Europe should play a more active role in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning from Belgium. I just would like to say that I'm drinking still my Korean green tea, which is lovely, so delicious, and gives me a very nice memory of my last visit to South Korea, which was pre-corona times. It feels like ages, but it was just in 2019. I cannot believe it. It was just 2 years ago. And thanks so much to the organizers. Thanks, Mariana, for inviting me to participate in this very timely and very important event, and also for the opportunity to contribute the policy brief on the new EU Indo-Pacific strategy. A policy brief, I understand, that will be out next week. I think you have mentioned, right? And I would like to actually discuss and share with you my thoughts on the EU's policy in the Indo-Pacific, in reflection, of course, also at the end of some of the challenges that the EU faces, obviously in promoting that role in Asia. I would like to start by pointing out a little bit of background. So where does that EU policy towards Indo-Pacific come from? It's obviously not out of nowhere. It's not all of a sudden that in 2021 we have that policy. In fact, it was back in 1994 that the European Commission produced its first Asia strategy paper, 1994. The document then stressed the need for the EU to strengthen its economic presence and develop a political dialogue with the region. So at the time, really, the focus was primarily on the economic dynamics and also to start political talks with various countries in order to contribute to regional security. Gradually, with the progress of the European integration from the early 1990s and also the EU's not only ability, but also willingness to play a larger global role, was an important driver for the EU to start giving even much more attention to that part of the world. Then we have in 2001, the European Commission's Asia paper, which actually brought a whole new dimension to the Union's relations with the region, a security one. And I'm specifically stressing that because also my expertise is security, and because at the time it was certainly a very interesting, very new element appearing in that new document by the European Commission. And in fact, what Europe said, and I quote, "We should now build global partnerships and alliances with Asian countries." So end of quote. And of course, if you look over the course of the next 2 decades, indeed, we have the bloc has established 5 strategic partnerships. We have obviously South Korea, a very important partner, but also Japan, China, we have India and ASEAN, signed free trade agreements. Also, again, South Korea is a very important player in that regard, also Japan, Singapore recently, and Vietnam as well. In 2016, we have the EU's global strategy to Asia. In 2018, we have the European Council conclusions, which specifically focus on enhancing EU's security cooperation in and with Asia. So there was again that focus on the security dimension, obviously in recognition of the changing geopolitical and security dynamics in the Asia Pacific that we are observing. Since the 2000s, I can say that the EU's role in the security area has certainly deepened, and that in particular, so it has expanded beyond the economic dimension, and in particular, what we defined as non-traditional security areas. In other words, where we see the EU focusing on counter-terrorism, anti-piracy cooperation with various countries, participation, connectivity partnerships. Obviously, this has been one of the important tools in EU's engagement, partner capacity building, and stepping up diplomatic engagement. And then, of course, in recent years, we have that gradual geostrategic shift and reconceptualization of the region, as we know, from what used to be the Asia Pacific to what we now call the Indo-Pacific. Of course, countries in the Asia Pacific have produced their own Indo-Pacific policies. Japan was one of the first countries to actually engage with the concept of Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific, what started already back in the early 2000s under the first administration of former Japanese Prime Minister Abe, and then under the second administration between 2013 and 2020, that was free and open Indo-Pacific was announced, and then really became also a core aspect of the US strategy in Asia. In fact, the Trump administration's focus on the free and open Indo-Pacific was very much drawing on this previous focus of Japan as well as Australia on the Indo-Pacific, and in particular, obviously, based on the establishment of Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, in the mid-2000s. Then we have in Europe, obviously, that had an impact. We had France producing its own paper 2018. In 2020, we have Germany and the Netherlands. And these were, of course, very much stimulating the internal debate within the European Union. But as I have been pointing out now from the start of the presentation, the outcome, what we see, the Indo-Pacific strategy published now in September, officially announced in April, published in September, is actually drawing upon that already decades-long engagement with the region. So in fact, it is obviously not something new, but in my view, as for example, one of the conclusions which I point out in my policy brief, it is kind of building up on what Europe has already been doing in the region, streamlining policy and trying to find a more coherent approach to the region. Now, in my policy brief, what I look at, as I call it, the why, what, and how of the EU's Indo-Pacific engagement. In other words, I specifically divide it into parts in the paper, and I look why engagement, what will be it about, and how. In other words, what are the policy tools? I will not, of course, read it out for you, and I will not go in details. I just would like to focus on some specific elements that I find important to share with you now in this panel on the strategy, and to conclude with certain constraints that the EU is still likely, of course, to experience, to continue to face, but also my overall assessment of the strength of that paper in comparison, let's say, to previous documents that we have seen. So why the EU's Indo-Pacific engagement? And essentially, my again going back to the point I was making, that it is really building upon a decade-long experience. It is really not surprising that the key driver that appears actually on the first page of the document, the main driver, is economic in nature, right? And this is absolutely not surprising to anyone. As indicated right from the start in the document, the region provides enormous economic opportunities for Europe, which is not surprising. It produces 60% of global GDP. We have our major and largest trading partners located in the region. And as is pointed out in the document, the EU and the Indo-Pacific are, quote, natural strategic partners in terms of trade and investment, end of quote. Already at the beginning, however, the EU expresses its concerns about what it calls the security of the major waterways, of course, referring to the sea lanes of communication in the region, which are critical for the EU trade. Some of these, South China Sea in particular, as we all know, are areas of ongoing maritime territorial disputes. So I found it actually quite significant that right from the start, the EU already, while expressing the importance of the economic driver, also already points out to a particular concern that the European Union has in the region. The second set of drivers for the EU's deeper engagement includes specific non-traditional security challenges, notably environment and climate change related ones. Again, this is not surprising for us that this is mentioned right from the start, given that these occupy a key place among the EU's general foreign policy priorities, and the tools in the EU's toolbox are really very strong, in particular in these issue areas. Geopolitical drivers come third in the document. The EU is concerned, quote, about the intense competition, military buildup, and display of force in the region. So very clear, very strong statement about the geopolitical dynamics, military buildup that we see across the region. all countries are increasing defense spending. There's a production or acquisition of ballistic missiles. A lot of investment is strengthening navies, military exercises, and various groupings of countries in various minilateral formats that are showing off their military power and deterrence capabilities. So this is clearly mentioned in the document. Notable is the reference made to China's military buildup in this regard, and the explicit mentioning of the Taiwan Strait situation, of course, which, of course, has become quite tense over the past years. The final set of drivers are largely ideational in nature, and they reflect, of course, the EU's long-standing commitment to foreign policy to promoting shared liberal democratic values and rules-based international order. Again, nothing new for us, of course, as we know what the objectives of EU foreign policy are. But the document really makes references to the EU's concerns about the threat of democratic principles and human rights in the region, presence of unfair trade practices and policies of economic coercion in the Indo-Pacific. And to me, it's again notable, these particular references, that the EU is becoming somewhat more, I can say, outspoken, on issues that are becoming clear challenges to the regional order in the region. The what of the EU's Indo-Pacific, second point. So what is it about? The EU's engagement in the region is clearly based on several key principles, which are closely, of course, aligned with the main rationale for the EU strategy, focusing on inclusivity, focusing on promoting rules-based multilateralism, and ensuring a level playing field and fair environment. Partnership and cooperation are, I think, the leitmotif of the EU's new Indo-Pacific strategy. This means working with China, right, on issues of common concern, despite the differences in political systems and values. But this also means that the EU strategy is not all about China. In other words, inclusivity means that you will include like-minded partners, but also less like-minded partners, right? So while China is clearly mentioned as one of the players, there is a reference made to a number of countries, in particular, of course, South Korea, also Japan and many other countries with which the EU will be seeking to deepen relations and either reinforce existing strategic partnerships or establish new strategic partnerships. What is interesting, I found in the paper, that the EU makes reference, point out to it in its intent on promoting values and even pushing back, that's direct quote, against China on fundamental disagreements such as on human rights. Again, I find that quite significant this particular reference. In other words, the overall tone, I think, of the paper suggests an EU-China approach that is nuanced, yet really conscious of the challenges to the liberal order brought about by China's rise. Of course, we are yet to see in reality, in practice, how the EU is going to do that, exactly pushing back against China, right? So one thing is obviously discourse and rhetoric. Another thing is actually following up with specific actions and policies. Another interesting point I found, the strategy describes 3 geographical areas of vital importance to the European Union's interest, making it clear that the EU intends to reinforce existing networks of partnerships in order to tackle shared challenges. These particular geographical areas are, on the one hand, so we have first the Indian Ocean is pointed out, of course, very important, the Indian Ocean, critical to sea lanes of communication stability and freedom of navigation. The second region that is explicitly mentioned is Southeast Asia, so ASEAN, obviously, very important, and there is a long-standing partnership between the European Union and Southeast Asia. And then finally, the Pacific region countries, including the Pacific Island countries. So to me, that was really in the strategy, I see some sort of a panoramic, if I can call it panoramic picture of the region, which kind of, shows that, of course, it goes much beyond China. It presents certainly more, I can say, comprehensive vision of the region in a way. the EU is kind of presented as being positioned at the center of a large network of partnerships that will enable the EU essentially to achieve its regional objectives by diversifying away from, I would interpret in a way that diversifying away both from China, but also the United States. In other words, very much in line with that discourse of strategic autonomy, I find, of the European Union that we have been hearing in recent years. Finally, the how aspect of the EU strategy, the toolbox, the policy specific, I'm not going to look in details. I will just mention that we are very much familiar, and there was really not a lot of kind of a surprise in those policies: sustainable and inclusive prosperity, green transition, ocean governance, digital governance, connectivity. Of course, in many of these policies, they are building on already existing partnerships and initiatives that the EU has had with different partners. These are just now being much more streamlined and conceptualized as part of that intention of the EU really to become more noticeable, in the Indo-Pacific. One point just about security and defense, again, something that I'm specifically interested, it's mentioned in the EU's document as the 5th priority for the European Union. And this section clearly points out that the EU is intending to strengthen its naval presence through joint exercises and port calls, right? So joint exercises and port calls with Indo-Pacific partners, in particular to fight piracy and protect freedom of navigation, as well as to extend, for example, there is mention to extend the Indian Ocean capacity building projects of the European Union to the Southern Pacific. Of course, we are yet to see how the EU in particular will play a role in that naval dimension, strengthening its naval presence and participating in protection and freedom of navigation. This is something we will be closely following in the coming months and years. Now, the final point I would like to mention is, so what are actually the remaining limitations and how should we probably overall assess that Indo-Pacific strategy? We should recognize that there are some important geographical and structural limitations existing, which are likely to remain. The first important point is that the Indo-Pacific is not a main geographical area of Brussels foreign policy, right? Has not been, is not, and is not likely to be for, of course, obvious reasons. The focus, of course, in EU's foreign and especially security and defense policy, as you know very well, has been on areas and regions closer to us in Europe, which also means, of course, less diplomatic, less economic, less, in particular, military resources for involvement in the Indo-Pacific. So the Union's military power projection capabilities outside NATO remain limited. That's very clear. And in particular, Europe's forces are configured still very much for continental missions and conflicts in the immediate neighborhood, right? Whereas the Indo-Pacific remains very much a maritime region. So maritime dimension of the region to the EU's hard power and geographical limitations of its foreign policy. Of course, the EU also does not have permanent troop deployments in Asia. Of course, if we exclude France as the only resident power, obviously, that has some naval presence in the region, the EU as such does not have. Of course, obviously, if you compare with the United States, heavy presence, in particular Japan, South Korea, permanent troop deployments, but also rotational presence, Australia and other countries. And the US, obviously, strong security and defense partnerships with a number of players in Asia, including India, including Indonesia, including Singapore, and even in recent years, US-Vietnam relations. Now, there are also additional structural limitations, and that, of course, well known to all of us, the ability or inability to speak with one voice, right? The disunity within the European Union, which to a large extent has been very much actually used by China in certain occasions. We have seen that with regard to ASEAN, the divide and rule strategy pursued in Southeast Asia, where China has been trying to separate, for example, ASEAN claimants in the South China Sea from non-claimants in the South China Sea, kind of, rolling out economic initiatives to separate claimants from non-claimants in order to prevent a joint anti-China strong stance. Similar what we see here in Europe happening with regard to the Belt and Road, trying to separate countries that may get the most advantage of the Belt and Road from those which not, in order to prevent the EU speaking with one voice on the sensitive issues to China, human rights, Tibet, Xinjiang, Taiwan, just to name such a few. So inability to speak with one voice, that remains a constraint. How to deal with China, of course, remains a key point of divergence within the bloc. There has been important evolution, however, in the EU's thinking on China over the years, especially since the announcement of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. Initially, I remember here in Brussels, there was a huge enthusiasm about the Belt and Road, economic opportunities for the European Union. But gradually over the years, I think there has been really this kind of, in particular, what we see in the 2019 EU-China strategic outlook document, there has been some sort of transition in the bloc's thinking from looking at China purely as an economic opportunity partner to also now recognizing that behind the infrastructure, connectivity, so to speak, innocent initiative, there is a lot of geopolitical ambition. Hence the reference to China, as we see in the 2019 EU-China strategic outlook document, a partner, competitor, strategic rival, right? So this is really is an important awakening, so to speak, in Brussels thinking. At the same time, on the positive side, I think the way I was assessing the strategy is that I think we clearly see in the document that the European Union seems to be really mindful of the limitations that it faces for placing a role in the Indo-Pacific. In particular, if I compare with earlier documents or with earlier statements or very ambitious kind of, policies that previously have been proposed. In my view, the document really tries to emphasize the strength of the bloc while recognizing own limitations. And I think this is really a good indicator of a maturing strategic vision towards the region, which we should, I think, acknowledge in a very positive way. In other words, that is a definition now of the EU's objectives of, specific policies that the EU wants to mobilize resources and to propose tailor-made policies that will really make a difference in the region, but obviously, of course, serve the EU's own interest. You see, finding a balance between pursuing policies that would benefit us in Europe, but that would certainly very much contribute to the region, so that that would also obviously improve the image of the European Union in that part of the world. And that we would also perceive that Asia would perceive the EU much more as a partner on which you could rely, not only a partner which comes with very nice statements and documents and declarations and promises many things, and at the end, not a lot has been realized. So I think this is already very much, the EU has been mindful of that based on past experiences. Practical, issue-based and functional cooperation with a diverse set of partners is really the basis of this EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. The strategy, to conclude, is just, in my view, really streamlining the European Union's existing policies, as I mentioned, and various forms of engagement in Asia by articulating or trying to articulate a more coherent, more structured approach, right, which is built actually on EU's decade-long engagement. That's why I actually also divided the paper in the why, what, and how of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy to try to illustrate that there is really already the serious, clear evolution in EU strategic thinking. I think the EU is really realizing that it is not a great power in the military power sense, obviously in Asia. It should not be part of major power or great power politics, and really should focus on the strengths, which are very much rooted in the soft power of the European Union, and of course, normative foreign policy tools.
Thank you, Elena. I would have to stop you here.
Yes, okay, I will stop here. Thank you so much. Apologies for this a little bit longer presentation. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm sure that the audience appreciated this comprehensive yet concise review of the new strategy of the EU for engagement in the Indo-Pacific. I particularly like the aspect where you elaborated on the challenges and you focused maybe a little bit more on the challenges stemming on the side of the European Union itself. What are the internal challenges? But there are also obviously quite a few external ones as well that pertain to the relationships and the interactions between key partners in the region itself. And this is how I make a transition to the next paper. I see already that there is a comment for Dr. Atanassova-Cornelis, but or a question to answer to, but I will kindly ask you to wait a bit more so that we could address all questions at the end. But we should swiftly actually move forward to the other presentation. Thank you once again, Elena, for framing our discussion in this panel through the wider EU Indo-Pacific lens. As I mentioned, some of the challenges stem from the actual relationships between countries and key partners of the European Union in the Pacific region. A good example of that is South Korea and Japan, which we know that for decades now have been struggling with reconciling some historical conflicts arising from the World War II past, and the next paper addresses how we could learn from that experience of South Korea and Japan engaging in a conversation on how to put the past behind and still develop their relations despite ongoing conflicts. And I would like with this to give the floor to our Next Generation Korea Fellow Margarita KICHUKOVA, who will, as I introduced, discuss that experience in the sense of how this could be useful for us here in Bulgaria when we talk about our current let's say, downturn in relations with our neighbors of North Macedonia. So Margarita, you have the floor and you can share your presentation. I would just kindly ask you to stick to maybe 12 to 15 minutes stop so that we finish mostly on time. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present today. I would like to express sincere gratitude to Korea Foundation and EPI and also my mentor, Milena and Andreeva. Thank you so much for your help in the process. So I will share my screen, and if my presentation turns out to be too long, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. As you can see from the title slide, let me just use the full screen mode. Okay, can you see my slides right now?
Yes, we see.
Okay, so the title of my policy paper is the role of people-to-people exchanges as a path towards historical reconciliation between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, policy recommendations based on the South Korea-Japan experience. So without further ado, let me highlight the key points of my paper. As it's clear from the title, we are going to address two regions with ongoing historical disputes, namely Bulgaria and North Macedonia versus Japan and South Korea. The policy paper suggests functional people-to-people initiatives for strengthening bilateral relations. You may ask, what are people-to-people initiatives? These are activities which involve direct exchange of direct human exchange. So I will briefly mention why this is a good idea in the next slide. And the key point of my paper is that historical reconciliation should be seen not only as a goal, but also as a process towards improving bilateral relations. And it shouldn't be seen as an obstacle to it, meaning that even if we haven't fully achieved historical reconciliation, we can do so by introducing effective people-to-people initiatives and thus overcome the historical differences while working on the bilateral relations simultaneously. And why I'm using this as an example, why I'm using Japan and South Korea as an example, is because this pair of countries has a longer experience in the said process. However, there are certain differences and similarities between the two regions that needs to be addressed, and I will do so in the next slides. So first of all, let's explain why people-to-people initiatives are good for this purpose of historical reconciliation. You can see the detailed analysis in my full paper, but just to be brief, people-to-people initiatives have 4 main benefits. The first one is changing participants' minds or way of thinking. The second one is creating lifelong benefits for the participants involved. And the third one is bringing resources to the countries involved. For example, people-to-people initiatives could create more open-minded human resources and also academic research topics which present different points of view. We can also address critical topics through people-to-people initiatives. And why people-to-people initiatives fit this policy? I believe that all 4 points are relevant to this policy paper, but most of all, in the case of Bulgaria and North Macedonia, we need to focus on changing participants' minds, which is the first point, and helping addressing critical topics, because as we are all aware, there have been certain historical disputes which with North Macedonia's application for EU accession has been even more aggravated. So I will speak about this in a minute. But before that, let's take a look at the common characteristics for both Japan and South Korea and Bulgaria and North Macedonian relations. So let's see what these regions have in common. So first of all, in both cases, we can talk about post-World War II conflicts. In both regions, we also witness enhanced nationalism. More specifically, we have certain arguments over historical figures and events. We can also talk about high-level resolution attempts, meaning that in both pairs of countries, we already have the existing legal frame to solving certain issues and working on promoting bilateral relations. However, we need to make this legal frame more actively implemented. And then another characteristic that the two regions have in common is external influence to seek reconciliation. In the case of Japan and South Korea, this is mostly the USA. And in the case of Bulgaria and North Macedonia, we can talk about the European Union. And the same goes also for participation in security alliances. Without further ado, let's see what these regions have in terms of differences. So each of these pairs of countries, they have their unique characteristics in their relations. So in the first column, you can see the Japan-South Korean relations. In the case of Japan and South Korea, there is active territorial dispute, something which does not exist in between Bulgaria and Macedonia. Also, Japan and South Korea have quite well developed connectivity and infrastructure, something that Bulgaria and North Macedonia have yet to achieve. Also, Japan and South Korea are codependent on their bilateral relations in a much greater way than Bulgaria and Macedonia are. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the paper, of the presentation, Japan and South Korea have longer experience in the improvement of their bilateral relations, as I will mention in the next slides. In the case of Bulgaria and North Macedonia, there are also certain disputes. The one which is unique in comparison to Japan and South Korea is that while we don't have a territorial dispute, we have dispute over language and national identity, because although Bulgaria recognizes North Macedonia's independence, they still have yet to achieve the existence of Macedonian nation and language. Also, on the other hand, in terms of connectivity, there is a project called a roadmap for lowering roaming charges between the European Union and the Western Balkans. More details about this you can read in the full paper, but the important thing is that there is a proposal for reducing roaming charges between Bulgaria and North Macedonia as part of this roadmap. So on the next slide, I have outlined the Bulgaria-North Macedonia relations in the state of the historical conflict. As you can see, in 1992, Bulgaria first recognized North Macedonia's independence. In 1999, the two countries have signed a joint declaration of the two prime ministers, and which was ratified by a joint memorandum in 2008. In 2017, the two countries signed a treaty on friendship, good neighborliness, and cooperation. And in 2018, a joint commission on historical and educational issues was formed. However, the work of this commission have raised some questions because as of today, 2021, we witnessed North Macedonia's initiation of EU accession negotiations, which was not fully backed up by Bulgaria, precisely due to disagreements between the members of this commission and its work. So let's take a look at the conflict premise and the status quo of the South Korea-Japan relations. So I assume
most important because the time is pressuring us. Okay, so Korea was under Japanese occupation until 1945, and after that, of course, the relations between the two countries have been strained, but in 1965, the two countries achieved diplomatic success by signing the Treaty on Basic Relations between Japan and the Republic of Korea. But what is important to underline about this document is that continuous diplomatic efforts, despite the background of numerous historical disagreements, have been made, and the two countries continue to work on their differences despite these not fully yet achieved historical reconciliations. So in the next slides, I will explore three initiatives, people-to-people initiatives, which exist between Japan and South Korea, and discuss how can they be implemented between Bulgaria and North Macedonia in an effective way. So the first one is UNESCO's program of education for international understanding. So UNESCO defines three pillars of education, which are international understanding, cooperation, and peace. So those notions exist undividedly, and they are crucial for this program. In the case of Japanese-South Korean relations, Japanese students' clubs collecting donations for South Korean children were formed shortly after the Korean War. And to keep it brief, this program underlines the importance of student involvement for the benefit of historical reconciliation. The program was aimed to make Japanese students more aware of worldwide issues and also make them more involved with charity. So let's take a look at how can this example help the Bulgarian North Macedonian case. So first of all, charity initiatives strengthen people-to-people relations and exposing youth to various social problems as well as their potential solutions. Therefore, as I mentioned before, it creates more open-minded human participants, and it makes them more aware of how to solve certain social problems, make them more open-minded to solving different social situations. Also, in the case of Bulgaria and North Macedonia, due to the economic situation of both countries, there are multiple fields in which donations or voluntary work is needed. Not to mention that the two countries already have an underlying tradition in the face of Macedonian charity, cultural, and educational fraternities in Bulgaria, which are organizations formed by Macedonian refugees, which had escaped Macedonia and moved to Bulgaria years after several conflicts in the Balkan region. So the next initiative is Korea-Japan Joint Higher Education Student Exchange Program under the Global Korea Scholarship. I believe that most of you know that South Korea places a very high emphasis on education, and Global Korea Scholarship attracts students from all over the world to study in Korea. However, there is a preferential program for Japanese students only, which aims at promoting international exchange in education as well as mutual friendship between Korea and Japan. What is interesting about it is that Japanese students are taking mandatory Korean language and Korean culture courses. And not only that, but they also have the possibility to choose and study as exchange students
in history-related majors, which produces not only more open-minded young people, but also academic resources such as academic theses written by Japanese students, which have been exposed to Korean educational system and Korean point of view on history. So how can this example help the Bulgarian North Macedonian case? To be fair, there is a scholarship program from Bulgaria addressed to North Macedonian students. But unilateral scholarship programs could be seen as controversial precisely due to the fact that they involve exam on Bulgarian history, which might challenge the Macedonian national identity. Alternatively, we can offer dual degree programs. Several of those programs were listed in my paper because they actually exist between Japanese and South Korean universities. To make this program more effective, it's important to envision precise topics for academic exchange, aka non-controversial topics, and to initiate this type of activities. A certain level of historical reconciliation needs to be achieved prior to the start of the program in order to avoid conflicts. And the last initiative I would like to focus on is a Global History Workshop. More precisely, is the 2018 edition called An's Theory of Peace is Key to Resolving Conflicts in Asia. So on the slide, you can see a photo of An Jung-gun, who is a Korean independence fighter, but he's considered a terrorist in Japan because of his act of shooting Ito Hirobumi, the Japanese prime minister. So to overcome this historical dispute, there is a peace theory workshop organized in South Korea, which invites Japanese students, presenting the historical event as objectively as possible, presenting the views of both parties, and offering a platform for academic discussion. Moreover, English is also used as key to avoiding conflicts and restoring good communication, according to the organizers of the workshop. And how can this example help the Bulgarian or Macedonian case? In this case, it is important to bring forward similarities in historical truth. So, for example, we also have figures which provoke historical disputes, such as King Samuel or Cyril in Methodius. Instead of focusing on differences, we can focus on similarities, for example, by emphasizing our Slavic roots. And unlike the previously mentioned workshop in Korea, rather than academic discussion, I believe it's better to include a wide selection of interactive tasks, because this also contributes to empathy and encouraging human connection. Also, English could be a good way to avoid linguistic arguments, especially those concerning the Macedonian language. And with this, let me summarize the policy recommendations. So the first point is to prioritize a long-term joint people-to-people initiatives as a historical reconciliation method for sustainability. Secondly, it is crucial to enforce state policy to provide a legal framework and facilitate access to funding for realization of said initiatives. Also, civic engagement for monitoring and evaluation of effectiveness is very important. And based on the South Korea-Japanese experience, it is vital to bring forward youth involvement, selection of topics, careful planning, and long-term goals. So thank you for listening, and I hope I didn't take too much of your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. Indeed, a very unique paper, and I do urge you to get familiar with it next week when we publish it on EPI's website. If we'll see at the end if we'll have time for a brief discussion, but let me swiftly move to our last, but certainly not least important panelist, and also Ms. Milena Andreeva happens to be the mentor of Margarita in preparing this paper, although the topic that she will cover today is quite different. As I already teased, it's going to be about strategic foresight and strategic planning and how the Korean experience could help Bulgarian public administration. So Milena, the floor is yours. I would just ask the colleague to prepare the presentation. Yes, I think we already see it. So Milena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Economic Policy Institute and actually congratulate you and the whole team of the Institute for your endless energy, professionalism, and dedication to putting more ideas and substance to the bilateral cooperation between Bulgaria and Republic of Korea. At the same time, a big thank you to the Korea Foundation as well as the Korean Embassy in Sofia. The topic that I'm going to cover today is actually quite broad, very complex. So I'm just going to briefly touch upon it, but I hope that I'm going to give you some food for thought. So the scope of the problem. We live in a time when we have very increasingly complex, very dynamic and uncertain environment, and therefore we need more and more vision and foresight of the future, long-term preferred direction where we want to be in 10, 15, 20, 50 years ahead. We need to anticipate the trends, developments, and challenges that are going to be ahead of us. So in this context, the European Commission recently included strategic foresight as a main mechanism for improving its policymaking and putting its fit to the future political agenda. However, many countries still do not include the so-called strategic foresight in their policymaking process, and Bulgaria is one of them. So let me first begin with what is actually strategic foresight and how it differs from strategic planning that we have heard about. Foresight is a process of exploring, anticipating, and shaping the future. As a tool for policy making, it actually contributes to strengthening preparedness and resilience, fostering participatory governance and evidence-based future-proof policies and engagements. And while strategic planning has certain steps to be taken that include scanning of the horizon for eventual changes, then we have analyzing mega trends that are occurring, developing different scenarios and comparing them, and then we envision the future. Strategic planning is analyzing the present, taking this data, we just transfer it, we just extrapolate it into the future, and then we decide where we want to be in, for example, 10 years. So we don't have this process of analyzing the other factors that might occur throughout this process of planning. And then the Bulgarian foresight issues. Planning is actually one of the main functions of the public authorities in Bulgaria, but we do not see strategic foresight as being included in those functions explicitly. In 2010, the Bulgarian administration adopted 4 different documents, and actually one of the most important ones was the methodology for strategic planning. It provides a system of rules and procedures of how the process of strategic planning should be implemented. But nevertheless, we need to underline that this methodology, even though it has some analytical part that is included, some elements from the strategic foresight, it does not have a status of a law, and it's just a recommendation, not an obligation for the public authorities. So here, once again, there is a lack of legal regulation of the process of strategic planning and foresight. In 2019, there was a law on strategic planning that was introduced. It was prepared, it was put for public consultations, but this law is not adopted. And here we have another issue to be tackled. There are more than 30 different specific specialized laws that actually oblige different actors, public actors, to make strategic documents. And the current number as of November this year of strategic documents is 147. Their structure differs, their timeline and content also differ. So by having this whole very complicated picture of different national strategies, we cannot see a clear vision where we want to be in the future. In order to have this gap fulfilled, there is a document called National Development Program Bulgaria 2030. And it has this vision of where we want to be in 10 years. Nevertheless, many of the national documents that are currently in place do not fall into the priorities of the document, and also were approved, for example, before this program to be adopted. I can say, for instance, the youth policy that is cross-sectorial policy is not very exclusively appointed in the program Bulgaria 2030. Another thing is that we as public experts, we need to be well prepared when we draft a strategic document like that. But unfortunately, the expertise of those government officials differs greatly. Since there is no specialized training that is dedicated to this drafting procedure. According to an analysis conducted by one German foundation, the administration of the Council of Ministers, and I quote here, has a very limited capacity to conduct profound evaluation of the content of proposed policies of ministries. We cannot say that there is a unified mechanism for coordination between the state actors while drafting those kind of strategic documents. And we do not have a document stating our vision of the country in, for instance, 20, 30, 40 years ahead of us. So what are the policy alternatives? And here I would like to say that the Republic of Korea is one of the good examples. First of all, because Republic of Korea was one of the pioneers in the future foresight process. Back in the 1960s, they initiated using this mechanism. Nowadays, it is perceived as a creative leader in the development and modernization. South Korea was the first in the world that actually established a research institute that was enacted by a legislative body, and this is the National Assembly Future Institute in 2018. And why this is important is because through having this independent institution, it first of all avoids the administration-led foresight, lack of continuity because of political changes, for instance, opinion-based ministerial research, or, for example, limitations related to exclusion of different stakeholders. So a dedicated institution, independent one, is very important for this very objective, future-proof policymaking. And among the advantages, as I said, of having this independent public body is to have a continuity, synergy of research, broad oversight over different fields. This will help to avoid duplication of efforts or financial resources. And all the other strategies are going to fall into this priority that is set up by this independent institution. And this institute, the Korean Institute, has actually assumed a very interesting research methodology based on a cyclical model that includes the forecasting the future, deciding on people's preferred future, proposing policy to fulfill to achieve this future, and continuously evaluating and monitoring the process. Special attention is given to the trainings and the competences, and Korea also has the first institute dedicated to future studies back in 2013. And here, just one very brief point, they have trainings not only for students, they have trainings for public officials, but also representatives of the National Assembly, the decision-making bodies. So here, the policy recommendations. First of all, we need to put strategic foresight and strategic planning into the legal framework of the Republic of Bulgaria in order to validate and standardize these processes. We need to outline that those two are actually complementary processes, and including them together in the legal framework is very important to contribute to unify the structure, the content, the time frame, and elements of the strategic documents. We need to find a way to have a better coordination. So following the Korean example of having an independent public authority might be also a good way forward to the public administration. This public structure could serve as a capacity building platform for both the public authorities and the citizens in regard to strategic planning, to have a future that is decided and coming up from the citizens themselves. This will be a venue for cooperation, for dialogue, participation, and inclusion of not only professionals and experts, but also the research academics, the citizens, and non-governmental organizations. This is going to be a body for coordinating and consulting and giving some feedback. And also it will be a way to overcome limitations related to dependence from executive bodies, political parties, or lack of synergy. Last but not least, among the main tasks of this public body could be to propose national strategies, conduct independent, and I would like to underline here, independent evaluation of the content of proposed policies, execute unbiased monitoring and control over the implementation of the strategies, because nowadays we see that many strategies are just staying on paper somewhere, not following the indicators, not following where we started and where we are after several years of implementing the strategy. And last but not least, we will, this way, when we have this broad vision, this institution can actually give different tasks to different ministries, and this way we'll have a broad oversight and avoid duplication of efforts and financial resources. One good example also from Korea is the Policy Task Management System, which is a very interesting instrument. So for those who are not familiar, please have a look. It's very valuable tool for coordinating, monitoring, and evaluation of policies. And here I would like to also stress on the importance of dedicated trainings for the public officials, as well as representatives from National Assembly and all other institutions that are involved in the whole process, not only of policy making, implementation, monitoring, and control. And such courses could be included in the portfolio of the Bulgarian Institute for Public Administration. And as summary, strategic foresight is a very essential and necessary tool for reforming the Bulgarian administration-led planning. And I would like to finish with one quotation from Confucius saying that plan ahead or find trouble on the doorstep. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Milena. I would like to maybe start from where you finished. You mentioned the one of the Bulgarian bodies that is responsible for educating our public administration and also streamlining the intervention, the introduction of such policy innovations, the Institute for Public Administration. Those of you who follow EPI's activities know that we have a wonderful working relationship with them. So we'll make sure to also forward the paper and the messages that you have sent their way, because they could be one of the truly the stakeholders to unleash the implementation of this. It is indeed a very important topic because we see also on EU level that the European Commission back in 2019 actually started its own task force on strategic foresight. And here at EPI, we're also proud to say that we are one of the first, maybe in Bulgaria, to also work towards popularizing the idea of strategic foresight, and we have conducted several trainings, including with public administration experts, where we show them how strategic foresight and scenario planning could be implemented. It could serve as an important of reference. So thank you so much for introducing us to the Korean experience in the field, and we'll definitely do our part in passing it on to the relevant institutions. Now, we are a bit behind schedule, but I still want to at least give the chance for 1 or 2 questions or comments maximum from the audience, either here at the venue or online. And I see that we already have a question waiting since the very start of the session, and it is addressed to Dr. Atanassova-Cornelis from Raina Beneva, who is I believe a professor at the Korean Studies Department of Sofia University, and it tackles upon the involved, like as she mentioned that she's involved in the establishment of the Southeast Asian languages in culture scholarship and education here in Sofia University, and would like to ask, how do you think such development of scholarship and education in Sofia University is aligned with Bulgarian and EU strategy and interest regarding people-to-people connectivity too, and how Bulgaria and Korea in particularly are contributing to the EU-ASEAN dialogue or could more actively play a role in it? So if Elena would like to briefly comment, then we'll see how the discussion will go. Elena?
Yes, thank you so much, and many thanks for the fantastic presentations of the 2 ladies. Absolutely, it was such a fantastic learning experience to me as well. Many thanks for that. By the way, the Center of Eastern Languages and Cultures was my alma mater. I also studied there, so I'm it's quite familiar, of course, with the institution, and have excellent memories when I did my Japanese studies and then studied in Japan and traveled in Asia and then became an expert on Asia. And I think maybe one example is actually my own experience indeed, because if we speak about establishing Southeast Asian languages and cultures, it is about promoting awareness of the region in Bulgaria. It is about exposing Bulgarian students to Asia. Like in my case, I went to Asia, and this is how, when you're exposed to a language, to culture, and then you develop with interest, and then of course gradually that becomes part of your profession. And this is one of the main aspects, is that if we want to promote the region and the understanding of the region, and to actually to explain why the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific is important for Bulgaria and for Europe, we have to start with the younger generation. And education is a powerful tool, I think, in that regard. I think that and the webinar that we had just a few days ago, and Mariana, of course, participated on the Indo-Pacific, we concluded that there is very little understanding, awareness, and even to a certain extent ignorance about the importance of the Indo-Pacific in Europe. And we have quite divergences, for example, whereas the Germans or the Dutch, because of the trade, economic relations, are much more active, much more interest. There's much more programs about Asia. In Central Eastern Europe, Bulgaria is an example, of course, that is still lacking. So obviously what Raina is mentioning, that she's engaged in such an important task, and not easy one, of course, of promoting Southeast Asia, that is absolutely, certainly aligned with the objectives of the European Union in promoting interregional relations with Asia, and in particular EU-ASEAN, which already have a long-established relationship. And Bulgaria and South Korea, of course, are part of this region. So when we talk about the interregional relations and promoting mutual understanding, enhancing, building relations, this happens at the multilateral level, obviously EU-ASEAN, but it's also happened at the bilateral level, so minilateral level. So all these networks that are built between different countries in Europe and Asia are contributing to bringing the regions closer to each other. And in particular here in Europe is really important to promote, notably in Central Eastern Europe, that engagement with the Indo-Pacific is very critical, of course, for economic, for our well-being, but generally from the perspective of global politics and the way the world is evolving. So younger generations, I think the education of the younger generation is the most important tool, one of the most important tools in particular, in addition to the economic toolbox that we have in the European Union, but education and exposing young people to Asia remains, in my view, a critical aspect of our policies. So good luck, Raina, with that very, very important initiative, which is, of course, built on the long-standing already existence of the Japanese studies, obviously Korean, China, right, that we already have those chairs. So Southeast Asia or ASEAN will provide an absolutely necessary addition to the expansion of that vision about what Asia is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena, for answering to that question. And indeed, we agree here at the EPI that the young people are the key. We need to educate them. We need to get them involved, and we need to increase their stake in making policies regarding European or Bulgarian interaction and cooperation with the East Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. With that, I think we should put a full stop to our discussion for today, but definitely we welcome and invite you to continue to stay engaged. As I already mentioned, all the papers will gradually be released starting from next week. So you will have the chance to read in full everything that was presented and discussed here. We will also make sure that those who were registered attendees, either at the venue or online, would have access to the PowerPoint presentations. And we also encourage you to subscribe to receive further information about the project as well, and all the upcoming papers that were not presented here at the forum. I would like to once again thank everybody for joining us today. I would like to thank our partners from the Korea Foundation and the Korean Embassy, all the Next Generation Korea Fellows, all the speakers we've had, Milena, who has been with us from the very, very start. I would also like to thank my colleagues from the Economic Policy Institute for the amazing support, and our also colleagues on the technical side from Dream Factory, who facilitated the event and made it possible for you to join us from every part of the world. Before we conclude, I want to just invite here up front our Executive Director, Yasin Georgiev, and the only Next Generation Korea Fellow who is currently in presence, Anita Dangova, for a small, let's say, how to say, award ceremony for her to receive her certificate as marking the successful completion of her participation in the Next Generation Career Fellows incubator.
So we're really proud and glad to see at least one of the fellows here with us.
Obviously, the other two will receive their certificates in the mail in the days to come.
Definitely, they're going to receive their certificates, but I'm really happy that Anita, who at the beginning of the fellowship was in the Netherlands, is now here with us in Sofia. And actually, Anita is the example for enlarging the scope of the initiative. I mean, we are happy to see that we are not only covering people who have already studied in Korea or people who have already been exposed to Korea, but we're reaching also people who professionally have interest to further engage with Korea. And this is one of the added values of the program. So, Anita, it is a great privilege for us that you're here and that you're among the second generation of Next Generation Korea Fellows here in Bulgaria. And we hope that you will be further on involved into the issues that relate to the relations between both countries. And we're sure that maybe next year you will be again involved in one or another way in this initiative. So once again, congratulations and all the best for the future.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Well, with this, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. And I invite those of you who are here with us to also join us for lunch, where we could continue the informal discussion and networking. The lunch will be at the restaurant downstairs. And for those of you joining us online, thank you once again for being with us, and stay in touch. We will be for sure making an effort to bring all the information, all the papers, all the presentations to you, so that you continue to stay involved. Thank you once again and have a good day.